Hi all, this is Steph Giordano with Human Services Research Institute, and welcome to the second module for this NCI AD refresher training for 2018-19. Here we're going to talk about the pre-survey and background information sections of the consumer survey. So the pre-survey form, this again is just very basic information to help you all surveyors set up the survey meeting itself. So it includes that information about whom to contact to set up the meeting, if others should be present, and whether there are additional accommodations that you may need or want to conduct the survey meeting. Whether and how the AD pre-survey form is going to be used is really dependent on your state. So you'll want to get in touch with your project coordinator to find out whether there are any updates to how you'll receive this information. The information that we collect in the pre-survey form is, again, only collected prior to the meeting taking place because, again, it's only used to set up the meeting. The information here is not collected or analyzed in any way by HSRI or by the state. You all, having conducted these surveys in previous years, may also know that there's some additional information that we don't ask about in the pre-survey form that may be useful to you all in setting up the meeting. And so you're always welcome to add on to the questions that you maybe ask or look for before getting into the field. Alright, so the remainder of this module will focus on the background information section. Now this is information that we at HSRI collect and analyze and report to states. It is information that's about the person's demographics and some personal characteristics of the individual. Largely this information comes from state records. However, you all may be required to collect or verify some information from the background section. You can talk with your coordinator about which questions you may be responsible for. There are some questions that may not be collected in the field. We'll know those questions because when we see the source of information, which is attached to each question, we only allow for information to come from administrative records. So let's do a quick review of the items that are in the background information section. Alright, so we're looking now at the NCI AD background information section for the consumer survey. Please make sure you're always using the up-to-date survey, so this year, the 2018-19 consumer survey. Taking a brief look just to remind you all of what's here. So we have that basic information, demographic information, person's age, gender, race, and ethnicity. We asked some questions about where the person lives. I want to just point out here for question BI6, what zip code does the person live in? This is not information that is stored in the database, but instead is transformed into a residential designation. So if the person lives in urban versus rural setting, that allows states to take a look and determine whether individuals experience services and supports differently, perhaps based off of the type of living setting that they're in. At the bottom of this page, BI11, we ask a question around self-direction, so if the person is participating in a self-directed supports option. I point this out only because this is an item that can only be collected by administrative records. Again, we know that because that source of data only allows for that one type of information source. We do have some information around various diagnoses the individual may have, and then some questions around functioning, so the person's level of mobility. This is a check all that apply. This is information that you may notice in the field, may not always reflect the person's mobility status, so it's one that's typically good to verify when you get in the field. These next couple of questions are around the types of services and supports individuals are receiving. Again, this is not information that will be collected in the field, but this is information that is helpful to browse before you get into the field because it will really help you when you get into those questions around the types of services and supports individuals are receiving. You might be able to help the person better understand the question that's being asked, as well as better relate the questions to the individual's particular circumstance. These last few questions here again are around the services and supports, and we wrap up by asking whether the person has a legal guardian. Again, this can only come from administrative records. So now we're going to just take a quick look at how some of these questions may be asked in the field.
There are a few other questions that I have just about you that we weren't able to get answered previously. Right. Could I ask you just maybe 2 or 3 more questions? Yeah. Thank you. What is your race and ethnicity?
Spanish, Russian, and Jewish.
And has your address changed in the past 6 months?
And from upstairs down.
You used to be upstairs?
I can't walk that good.
So in the same place, just upstairs.
So there we saw Cheryl asking just a few of these background information questions. I just want to go over some best practices for collecting this information in the field. So first, it should come from the best source available. This, as in the case with Cheryl and Ron, may come from the individual. You may also have a family member or a staff person available who can help complete this section. If the person is completing the section, the individual receiving services, please wait until after you go through the face-to-face meeting with the individual to collect this information. That's just because this is more prescriptive information and really takes away from that kind of conversational feel if you start out by asking these background information questions. Also, as you go through the survey, you'll remember that there are a number of questions that will relate to questions in the background information section, so you may be able to get some of those answered. Also, for this section and only for this section, you are allowed to let the person see the questions that you're asking as well as the answers. And again, that's because this is much more prescriptive and we are looking for the most accurate data here. It's less about the person's perception and really about what this information is in a very accurate way. So before getting into the field, again, there are just a few things that you'll want to check in on as to whether there are some updates for this year. So you'll want to know how you'll receive pre-survey and background information, and whether and what items you may be responsible for reviewing or collecting when you get into the field. So that takes us to the end of this second module for the 2018-19 NCI AD refresher training. We did a brief review here of the information that's collected in the pre-survey form as well as that background information, and we just recapped some best practices for collecting the background information, how it differs a little bit from ways that you may collect information for that face-to-face meeting, which we will discuss in this upcoming third refresher training module. So thank you all so much for tuning in.